Time for Johnny Mack in the house. He's brought to you by Harrah's Resort in Bally's Atlantic City. Wild Wild West are taking bets on the new sportsbooks. Wager today at the book. Break up with your bookie. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. The Eagles have announced that Darren Sproles is out with a hamstring injury. He will not play on Sunday. Same with Carson Wentz. Same with Alshon Jeffrey. But it looks like the Buccaneers will have a key offensive player in the mix. We'll talk Eagles, Bucs, and the NFL. With 97.3 ESPN.com, Eagles and NFL Insider John McMullen. At JF McMullen, he appears via the Boardwalk Honda hotline here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. John, what's the word, my man?
How are you, Mike?
Ric Flair got married again, see ya?
Yeah, number 5. Four-time loser, you swing again. 3 strikes and you're out, doesn't apply.
I love it. All right, no Sproles this week, and I heard you last night on the debut edition of Mosher, McMullen, and Krause, give kind of some insight on the way that Doug Peterson kind of leans on Darren Sproles. So how big of a loss is this for the game? And I bring this up because I see the numbers that Alvin Kamara had last week. A similar type of guy, a guy who catches the ball. He did a lot of his damage out of the backfield. So I thought that Sproles would have been a nice weapon in that Kamara role. So how big of a loss is this for Philly?
Well, it's a loss, as I said on the show yesterday. I mean, Doug Peterson trusts Darren Sproles, so that's a big part of it. But you also have to be realistic and understand, look, they didn't have him last year for the majority of the season. He got injured week 3, and they managed to persevere. So they've proven they can do it before. And when you're talking about a guy like Kamara, that's a whole different level of running back. So I don't think the Eagles have anybody on their roster that could compare to somebody like that. But Corey Clement will be next up, and his role will increase. And he proved in the Super Bowl, the biggest stage of them all. I always say about Corey, he probably improved more than any other player the most from day one through the Super Bowl last year, coming in as an undrafted guy and getting together with Deuce Staley and Deuce telling him what he needed to work on. And then he just worked his butt off and turned into a legitimate contributor. And now he'll have an opportunity to step up the game. Not only with the offense, he could be the punt returner. I think they'll probably let DeAndre Carter do it, but he's listed as the backup, and he did it in the preseason, so he could be a part of the game plan there as well.
Yeah, that's an area that we don't bring up all that much, but his role in the return game and how much of an impact that could be. Let me ask you about Corey. Ryan brought up the question to me about expanding his role. Seemingly, they use him in the fourth quarter when the other team's worn down, and he's the fresh legs. He's kind of like the closer. Just come in and close this game out. He gets like the short yardage. But if they gave him an expanded role, do you think that he's equipped for that?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to his time at Wisconsin where he was a lead back and he was a big-time back at the college level. Now, obviously, that's different, but that's a Big Ten school. It's a Power 5 conference. You're talking about a kid who got recruited to Notre Dame as well. So he was at one time a big prospect coming out of New Jersey, and he's used to handling the football a lot, and that's his ultimate goal. And I think if you fast forward to next season, I think the most likely scenario is he's sort of the leader of that committee. He is the guy because I think it's going to be very difficult for the Eagles and Jay Ajayi to probably continue on after this season. So for a number of reasons, both monetarily and physical-wise because of his knee issues. So I think that's what the Eagles are kind of doing, thinking about this long term and bringing them along slowly with the intent of handing over the main job to him next season. I think that's in-house. That's the goal.
John, I want to touch on the weather conditions really quickly because we're hearing a lot about it. Do you think that's overlooked or underlooked as far as how it affects the game?
Well, it's a little bit of both, and I'll tell you why. It's overlooked because, hey, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers think they have a big advantage early in the season because they practice in that kind of weather. It's going to be lower 90s, heat index 104, I think it's projected to be. So it's going to be really hot, and they're more used to it. So they think, similar to Green Bay in December, when it's really cold, they think they have an advantage. And I don't necessarily disagree with them. The other part of it, though, is that both teams have to play in it. So if you do handle it well, the other team's dealing with it as well, but it's just common sense that the team that's used to it should handle it better. But I always say, and I use Green Bay as the best example of this, because people always talk about the storied history of Lambeau Field and the home field advantage, which it certainly is. But it didn't exist between Bart Starr and Brett Favre, and that was a really, really long time. That was over 2 decades. So my point is, you might have the advantage of home field, whether it's good weather, bad weather, hot weather, cold weather, but it dissipates if you have a bad football team. So it kind of depends. If you're good, you generally take advantage of what your home field advantage might be. In the case of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I don't think we know yet what that team is. I think they're more talented than people think they are, but we still have a lot to learn about that team.
John, how much does Sproles being out this week negatively affect Doug's play calling? Like, how much will change from the Atlanta Falcons play calling to the Tampa Bay Bucs play calling now with Sproles being out?
I don't think it'll change much. And again, I point to last season when it's, the Eagles won a Super Bowl on the next man up philosophy. And they've done it time and time again. No matter who's out, the next guy steps up and they seem to find a way to win a football game. Sometimes it's ugly, like it was last week against Atlanta. And I wrote about it today, how badly they're missing Alshon Jeffrey on the surface because of the wide receiver position and the struggles there. But then I always go back to, what? They won the football game. I mean, this team, Jason Peters, Jordan Hicks, we know the list. Even Chris Maragos and special teams, Carson Wentz being the most notable, obviously. They keep winning football games. And, hey, I think Darren Sproles is very important to this offense, but is he more important than some of those guys that I mentioned? They're just going to march on, with him or without him, and this week they won't be. Obviously, they will not have him.
Yeah, one question, too, is we see that the secondary banged up. Grimes, Hargraves for Tampa Bay, both out. We know that Alshon Jeffrey won't play. Shelton Gibson also has been banged up. But let me ask you about Nelson Agholor as an outside receiver. He excelled in the slot last year. But in this matchup here, do they think that Nelson is the guy? He had 8 for 33. You talked about how paltry the yards per catch is there. But is he the guy that you think they need to get going, or is it maybe Mike Wallace in a game like this?
Well, I think without Alshon, Nelson's clearly your best receiver, but you mentioned the outside versus inside part of it. He's much more effective as an inside receiver. As a slot guy, there's a sort of diminishing returns the more you put him outside the numbers. Problem is, the 3 receivers they played last week were Agholor, Mike Wallace, and DeAndre Carter. DeAndre Carter at 5'9.5" is best suited to be inside. So their theory was Nelson's got to play more on the outside. It just doesn't work. So I think the hope from the Eagles until Alshon gets back is maybe Kamar Aiken can get on the field at least a little bit. And he's obviously not been the same receiver when he caught 70 balls the 1 year in Baltimore, 70 plus, but he's a 6'2" guy. He's an outside receiver. And at least if you have him out there, you can put Nelson Agholor in the slot where he's more effective. So I think it's just more valuable to play the guys who can enable you to put Nelson in the slot, because that's where he's most effective, and that's your best option at receiver until Alshon gets back.
John, here's an outside-the-box thought here. What do you think about the Eagles using Ertz more on the outside with Jeffrey out, and then bringing Goddard in at the same time and using him more in the Ertz usual position?
Well, the problem there is, it doesn't matter how good a receiver you are as a tight end, and I put Zach Ertz top 5 in this league, and he's detached a lot to begin with because that's the strength of his game, and he's not a good inline tight end, a traditional Y-back. It doesn't matter how good you are. If you're putting out guys with cornerbacks in the NFL, they're not going to get loose from corners in this league, and that's the problem you have. If they know they're not a threat in the running game, you're just going to split them out wide. They become wide receivers, and the best tight ends are too slow to deal and get away from NFL cornerbacks, even though Tampa Bay, as Mike mentioned, will not have 2 of their top 3 corners with Brent Grimes and Vernon Hargreaves. They're still NFL corners, and they're fast and they're athletic, and tight ends aren't going to get away from them. So if you don't add in the blocking aspect of it as a detached guy in the slot and the ability to do things from there and be physical, it becomes a matchup that goes in the other direction. They have the advantage because their guys are more athletic and they can cover in space.
Yeah. And you asked Doug about that, about the point of emphasis, whether or not it's going to be trying to get the ball down the field and take their shots against that secondary of the Buccaneers. So it's at least something that, and Doug kind of said he looks at things differently, but they might be banged up on the front end, on the back end, but he thinks they might be pretty good up front. Are they pretty good up front? Do you like their front 4 here, and to think that maybe they could be a big factor in this game?
Yeah, it's a lot better. I mean, that's what they did in the offseason. That was their intent, was to rebuild their front, and they really did. But Jason Pierre-Paul is questionable, so that's number 1. And if he does play, he's clearly not going to be 100%, nowhere near it. He's not healthy. He's got a bad knee. So that's going to hurt him. Gerald McCoy's their best player. He's their Fletcher Cox. He's a dominant player. So he is somebody you have to worry about. And then you have Benny Curry and Bo Allen have been, obviously know the Eagles, been a big part of the defensive line rotation here. They've improved things down there. So they are a lot better up front. But I thought Doug's answer to that was a little bit curious because he was talking about the offensive line. And, hey, when you look at this Eagles offense without Carson Wentz and Alshon Jeffrey, the only part of it that stands out is the offensive line, and that's why they won the football game against the Falcons, along with the defense. But from an offensive standpoint, the offensive line took over the game in the fourth quarter. That's the strength of this team. So they're going to give Nick Foles time to throw. I don't think there's any question about that. The question becomes, can Nick Foles get the ball to receivers that are named Carter and Wallace or Aiken? I mean, that's the issue, not the offensive line.
Now, last week they didn't really rotate the offensive lineman. It's going to be about 95 degrees down there. Doug was asked about whether he plans on doing more of that this week.
Yeah, I mean, generally you don't rotate offensive linemen in this league. It's not how it works. It's not like the defensive line. And no, they're not going to rotate offensive linemen. The only one you kind of have a question about is Jason Peters because he hasn't played a lot. Not only coming off the injury from last year, but he didn't play in the preseason, and all of a sudden he's up to whatever it was, 70 snaps in the opener, which was also a hot and humid day. But you're taking it up a notch with 104, 105 degree heat index. So if there's anything of that nature, you might see Vitae for a series or two to try to help a 36-year-old guy get to the finish line. But as far as wholesale sort of rotating offensive linemen, that's not how it works in this league. I mean, that's the one group that sort of revolves around chemistry. And remember, Doug kind of explained this, the difference between a defensive line rotation. Defensive linemen are running all day. They're pursuing. They're pass rushing. It's a lot more energy than an offensive lineman who's just sort of standing in the tackle box. So that's why you don't have the rotation there. And when you do have a rotation, you know what that generally means. It's the same thing as when you have two quarterbacks. You don't really have one, because if you don't have a guy good enough to start and you want to rotate him, that's generally an issue.
All right, John McMullen is with us here, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. You wrote about today at 97.3ESPN.com that the Eagles' travel plans could be interfered with a little bit.
Yeah, how about Doug today? Doug Hurricane Peterson. Evidently one of his hobbies is meteorology. He was giving us a breakdown of the storm, of the hurricane, obviously, in North Carolina, Hurricane Florence, and talking about how it was a tall storm and a wide storm. I shouldn't make joke of it because obviously it's very serious down there, but it looks like the Eagles might have to, because of the weather forecast is sort of fly around the storm. So typically it's a really quick trip to Tampa, and it might be a little bit longer if they have to sort of fly out west a little bit and then circle back. And that's what they seem to be planning to do. So a little bit more difficult road trip than typically.
Yeah, so for more on that, go to 97.3ESPN.com. John has all the Eagles and Falcons coverage from this week on our website. Want to get a couple quick hit thoughts on the NFL this week from you, John. Sunday night inside the NFC East, we've got Giants and Cowboys, two teams. One of them is going to be 0-2 at the end of Sunday night, and the other one, of course, sticks around 1-1. But both teams did not look very good in week number one. I thought the Giants looked better than the Cowboys did. But how do you kind of watch this Sunday night matchup?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the Giants are a better football team at this stage. It really is. I mean, I look at that Dallas offense, and I don't know how they're going to generate offense. It's going to be really, really difficult for them. And it's tough to win in this league if you have to win games where you're scoring 13, 14 points. It's just going to be terribly, terribly difficult until they start remaking that team as far as getting some wide receivers and tight ends that can move the football. You see it with the Eagles without Alshon Jeffrey. It's bad enough, but the Cowboys, they just do not have any weapons outside the numbers. So I think as a whole, I think this is going to be a really, really difficult season for the Cowboys, even though they've improved defensively and they've gotten incrementally better over the past few years, and they're actually not bad on that side of the football. But the offense is just Ezekiel Elliott and not much else.
Yeah. Tough to watch them. Yeah, on offense, they got no weapons on the outside, no safety blanket with the tight end. How about Washington? They're at home, 6-point favorite here, and they got a chance to go 2-0 against Andrew Luck's Colts, who, Frank Reich making his debut. They had a shot to win that game against the Bengals, who looked pretty good last night. But Washington, I thought, was one of the more impressive wins in week number one, although it was against the Cardinals, so people, I think, are kind of downplaying a bit. But I thought they looked pretty good in that game.
Yeah, they did, but it is, let's be honest, that's a very favorable schedule to start when you look from the Redskins standpoint. I think they are going to be 2-0, but then you're going to step back and say they did beat two probably pretty poor football teams. So I think, Washington has a chance to be the second best team in this division. But I don't know where that gets them, because I've said it a lot. I don't think this division is very good outside the Eagles. So I'm not sure if they're going to be in the wild card hunt, but I do think they are going to be the second best team in this division when it's all said and done, and they're going to get off to a good start and probably get a little too excited because they are going to beat the Cards and Colts, and there's going to be tougher hurdles down the line.
All right, let's look at a couple other quickies with John real fast. Get your quick hit thoughts on some of the key games this weekend. AFC rematch, Patriots-Jags.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people thought the Jags could have beaten the Patriots last year if they were more aggressive in the mold of Doug Peterson, and that became sort of a little bit of a controversy when Doug's book got released, and he kind of backhandedly criticized the Jaguars for the way they did kind of lay up, to use golf terminology, against the Patriots, and it ended up costing them. Hey, the Jaguars are very, very talented, especially defensively, as we all know. They still have the Blake Bortles hurdle to get over. I think they're a better team. I talk about this a lot when you talk about rosters and 2 through 53. I do it with Green Bay a lot. And it's clearly the Jaguars have more talent than the Patriots, but I got a difficult time picking Blake Bortles over Tom Brady.
All right, good schedule this week. Some other interesting games that are on the slate: Vikings-Packers, Panthers-Falcons, a lot of division matchups, Chiefs and Steelers. So it's a good Week 2 slate. Looking forward to that. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. And last night, Mosher, McMullen, and Krause debuted on 97.3 ESPN. Thursday nights, 6 o'clock from the Landmark in Glassboro. Huge crowd out there last night, and somebody won tickets to the Eagles-Bucs game. Thanks to those guys. I thought it was a great show, John. Thanks so much, man, for jumping on board, of course, every day here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.
Yeah, real quick, and I talked to Corey Clement today, Glassboro's own. He promises to come to the Landmark this season, so that's going to be exciting.
I know he made a couple appearances last year on the Monday night show, and looks like on the Thursday night he might pop out. And as we said, you never know. Tickets to that, they always got tickets, appearances, all sorts of special stuff. Plus, with Jeff and John going back and forth, it was excellent football conversation last night. Looking forward to the rest of the season, man. Thanks, man.
All right, thank you, guys.